feel. It has nothing to do with your emotions. It has everything to do with your choices. So when Jesus says to love your enemies, he says choose to treat them as if they have never hurt you in spite of what they have done. That, to me, is incredibly radical. What do you say? Amen. Jesus is calling us in the Northern New England Conference to be radical in our mindset for Christ, to reach out to men and women around us in love. And that is the perfection that he calls for. That is the spiritual maturity that he calls for. He asks us not to be spiritual infants, not to be spiritual babies, not giving only love for those that love us, and good to those that are good to us, and not retaliating with hate to those, and insult to those that insult us. He calls us to a spiritual maturity. The mind of Christ is radical. Secondly, the motives of Christ are radical. Jesus had a radical motive. Jesus depicted greatness in service. He never depicted greatness in education, the degrees after your name. He never depicted greatness in wealth, your bank accounts and credit cards. He never depicted greatness in the position that you held. That is to say, the boards and committees you're on. He never depicted greatness in honor, recognition, or fame, but always in service. Matthew, the 20th chapter, verse 25 through 28. The mind of Christ was radical. The mission of Christ was radical. The motives of Christ were radical. We look now at the motives of Christ. Matthew, the 20th chapter. Matthew chapter 20. We look there at verses 25 through 28. Jesus is establishing a kingdom on totally different principles. The principles of the world are not the principles of the kingdom. The principles of the world are not the principles of the kingdom. Jesus is establishing a new kingdom that has a new mindset. Jesus is establishing a new kingdom. A kingdom that has people prompted by new motives. Not the motive of self-aggrandizement, but the motive of service. Matthew chapter 20, verse 24 and 25 and onward. Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. In the Gentile world, greatness comes because of your position. In the Gentile world, greatness comes because of your authority. In the Gentile world, greatness comes because of your education. In the Gentile world, greatness comes because of your money or your wealth. But it is not so among them." Verse 26. "Yet it shall not so be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave." Now, Ellen White comments on that text, Desire of Ages, page 550, and she says, Christ was establishing a kingdom on different principles. He called men not to authority, but to service. So the call of Christ to our hearts is, where can I serve? The call of Christ to our hearts is, how can I bless? The call of Christ to our hearts is not position. It is not wealth. The call of Christ to our hearts is not power. These are new motives. Whoever I am, as a follower of Christ, the law of the new kingdom is, wherever I go, I want to serve. Wherever I go, I want to be a blessing. Wherever I go, Lord, what needs to be done? I am not above doing that. Now, there are two kinds of service. They are what I would call self-righteous service and true service. There's the self-righteous service that comes, and there is Christ-centered service. It is possible even to serve, but to have self-righteous motives if you're serving. Let me give you 8 characteristics of self-righteous service and 8 characteristics of Christ-centered service. Self-righteous service is concerned with the big deal. True service is concerned with doing what needs to be done. See, if you're self-righteous, you only want to serve if there's a big deal so you can notice. If you're Christ-centered service, then you want to serve for service sake. Self-righteous service requires external rewards. True service rests contented in serving. Service is its own reward. See, in self-righteous service, you have to have external rewards. Oh, you did such a great job. Oh, I did, didn't I? I know I was real humble about it, but I did a great job. See, that's self-righteous service. So self-righteous service requires external rewards. True service is rest contented in serving, and the service itself is the reward. Self-righteous service is highly concerned about the results. True service is free of the need to calculate results. It's concerned about one thing, blessing others. Self-righteous service picks and chooses who to serve. It serves only those who can advantage me if I serve them. It's very selective. True service is indiscriminate in its service. Self-righteous service is temporary. It serves only when it's to my own advantage. True service is a way of life. It's who I am. I serve for service's sake because Christ gave me new motives in my life. Self-righteous service is driven by ego. True service is motivated by love. Self-righteous service serves for applause. True service serves because there's a need. Self-righteous service asks, how did I do? True service shifts the focus to the other person and asks, how are they doing? Is there anything else I can do to bless? It is incredible to study the New Testament Christian church. When you look at the New Testament Christian church in history, and you go back to the original documents of the 1st and 2nd century, the early Christians were distinguished by their loving service to the community. Now let me give you two examples of that. One in the 2nd century, one in the 3rd century. In the 2nd century, 140, 150, there was a church leader by the name of Tertullian. And he wrote about what distinguished the Christians from all society and why they made such an impact. And here's what Tertullian wrote. He said, "It is the care of the helpless and the poor, and our practice of loving kindness that brands us in the eyes of our opponents." The brand that the early Christians had. Now, what is a brand? Just as cattle were branded with the mark of their owner to distinguish who they belonged to, early Christians were branded with the mark of loving kindness. New Testament Christianity was radical. It was real. It was authentic. It was genuine. If there's anything that young people long for today, it is authenticity in Christianity. What they want is to see authentic Christianity. You can try to indoctrinate them, but unless there is authentic Christianity, where the love of Christ fills our hearts, unless their moms and dads are different in their love in the home and their love in society, what you believe is not going to make a great difference if they see how you live, and there's a disconnect between what you believe and how you live. If there's that disconnect, it creates a spiritual dysfunctionality in the part of young people today. The early Christians were branded with the marks of loving kindness. They were branded with the marks of reaching out in service. They cared for people around them. They cared for the poor. They cared for the helpless. They cared for the marginalized in society. They were motivated by love to serve. Now in 260 AD, an epidemic of disease came through the lower part of the Roman Empire. Thousands and thousands in Europe were dying. We have an official record from Dionysius, who was the church leader, in the difference in the response between the Christians to the disease and the pagans to the disease. It is amazing. Here's a first-hand account. Now I want you to get the picture. People are shaking from head to toe with an infectious disease. The epidemic plague has come through. Thousands and thousands are dying. And Dionysius writes a letter describing the difference in that church, in that local congregation and the churches that he supervised. He writes a letter to another church about what was happening in his church. And this is what he writes. He's talking first about the Christians. And he says, heedless of the dangers, Christians took charge of the sick. They attended to their every need. They ministered to them in Christ. And with them, they departed this life sincerely happy. For they were infected by others with the disease, drawing upon themselves the sickness of their neighbors, and cheerfully accepting the pains of their neighbors if they could relieve their suffering. I mean, that is radical. That is radical. A plague sweeps through the church, and you minister to the infected ones, knowing that you may be infected yourself, and you die happily and cheerfully. Then look at what Dionysius says. He says, and I'm quoting Dionysius 260, The heathen behaved in the very opposite way. At the first onset of disease, they pushed the sufferers away, cast them into the streets, and let them die alone. The Christians were committed to service, the pagans to self-preservation. The Christians were committed to service, the pagans to self-preservation. This raises some serious questions for the 21st century. Is my attitude one of service or self-preservation? Is my goal to lovingly serve or selfishly advance my own ends? Is my motive control, power, money, or the unselfish